Welcome to Clienting, the place to get information about legal marketing and client development in the digital age. Here are your hosts, Gyi and Kelly Street.
Hey Gyi, how you doing?
Hi Kelly, I'm great.
Oh, good. I am super great too. As always, I say this literally every time. I am super excited today because we're recording Clienting. It is my favorite day of the week, month, whatever it is when we get to record.
You need some new hobbies.
That's probably true. Not a big hobby person, more of a books and listening to podcasts and recording podcast person, but that's all right. We can go into my need for hobbies again later, because I want to get to talk to our guest that we have today. Super excited. And you just met him.
I did. And listeners, you're in for a treat today because this is a very interesting person with an interesting practice. And I will let Kelly introduce our guest today, but I think this is going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, a lot of fun. All right, everybody, prepare yourself. We are talking with Chris Gober, Austin, Texas attorney, political attorney, which is super exciting and honestly just the tip of the iceberg with his firm. So Chris, will you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them a lot more about yourself?
Hey, Kelly, Gyi, thanks for having me on. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and the listeners. So you hit it. My practice expertise is in political law. I am the founder of the Gober Group. Our firm, we kind of like to say we represent clients in the political and business ecosystems, representing change makers who are companies, causes, and influencers. You know, they're often ambitious, disruptive, frankly, the types of clients who are under a microscope and need our unique expertise kind of at the intersection of law, business, politics, and relationships. We have an office in Austin, Texas, and in Washington, D.C., but our practice is really national. I represent clients, probably right now, active clients in over 35 states throughout the country.
Wow, that certainly makes for a different kind of practice when you are nationwide and have a variety of states that you have to work in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, both from just, the type of law firm and the way that we're structured that is probably much more telephone and email oriented rather than a brick and mortar shop that a lot of law firms. I mean, we don't have a whole lot of walk-in traffic, and just the way our entire setup is, our teams, how we operate, really with each other, and even how I staff people, it's probably different than a lot of law firms out there that are more of kind of that brick and mortar model.
Yeah, so I didn't plan to talk about this, but since you brought it up, the having more email and, probably video chat and phone call based communications with your clients, how do you inspire trust and kind of build up a relationship with a client who doesn't meet you face to face? Because I know that is a big worry for a lot of lawyers who are like, well, I don't want to text with my clients because that's, unprofessional or whatever their thought is. But how do you do that?
Well, I think, it's definitely a challenge in anything that, anytime we take on a new client, because a lot of times it comes in through a referral. And I'm sure we're going to talk a lot more about that. But I could, a pretty regular occurrence is I get a new client or have the opportunity to talk to a potential client that is, say, going to run for the United States Senate. And they refer to me by somebody else. And it usually starts with a telephone conversation. And a lot of time, in the vast majority of these cases, I will get that business and close on that client over, maybe it's a phone call, some follow-up emails, and maybe some written materials. But there are times where I will represent somebody for years before I may even meet them in person in some instances. And it's pretty odd in that way. And, you know so much about somebody, you talk to them all of the time, but because they may be in some state that, frankly, I never go to, I may not, it's funny how many times, like 2 years down the road, I'll meet somebody at an event or I know they're there and go walk up to them and say, I'm Chris Gober, I'm your attorney.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. That's so funny. I love that. Okay, so since you brought up referral-based marketing or getting referrals, is that a majority of how you get your clientele.
It really is. With being in the political world in particular, it's a smaller market. There's a very finite number of players. And so when somebody, let's just take that instance of somebody wants to run for the United States Senate, chances are as they kind of prepare for that, there's a limited universe of people they are going to seek out and talk to about that decision, about that process. And generally, when they do that, a name like Chris Gober even comes up in that conversation, or they get directed to somebody else out there. Maybe it's a particular political consultant, and they start with that political consultant, and then that political consultant recommends that candidate to us. And that's kind of how our world works a lot, is kind of through that referral network. I think there's very few people that are kind of jumping into this political game that are just jumping on the internet and doing a broad internet search and saying, well, who can I hire? Because part of this is educating these potential candidates on even their need for a lawyer. They don't understand probably the amount of regulations that really apply to their campaigns, but also too, people just don't look at it this way, but a political campaign is really like a business startup. When I represent a presidential campaign, it is analogous to a $100 million startup where we have corporate issues, we have labor and employment issues, contracts, copyright, trademark. I mean, you name it, we deal with it as effectively any other business entity would. And so while I think what separates us is our expertise in that campaign finance world. And that's why nobody can come in and do what we do. Our breadth of knowledge has to be much broader than that.
And I'm really curious how you got into this area. Lawyers are always asking us about carving out niches and following their passions. Was politics something you'd always been interested in? Did you see yourself kind of doing this? I think a lot of lawyers would, like you just said, don't even realize this is a practice area.
Yeah, so I think actually practicing in this area of law is quite by accident. I was a former kind of on the political strategy side. I worked on campaigns and worked on a couple of presidential campaigns and kind of ended up with that background. And I think, was an interest in politics and had that experience kind of on the ground as somebody that did more strategy and execution. And my first legal job, I was at the Justice Department. Ironically, I was working on the confirmation hearings and the processes for Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Alito. And I was looking, and kind of when that was wrapped up, I wanted to go out and be an assistant U.S. attorney. And all the budgets had been cut across the nation. It was very tough to get a USA job. And I wanted to come back to Texas, where I originally was from. And my old boss, who was now the chairman of a national political party committee, wanted me to come over and be an attorney at the committee. And I told him, I said, no way. I was like, that campaign finance stuff seems so boring. Like, that's just not what I want to do. I want to go prosecute terrorists. And I ended up saying, you know what, I'll go do it for a year. I'll put it on my resume, and then, hopefully something opens up in the U.S. Attorney's office in Texas, and I can go back. And so I got in there, I got in the door, and I realized, like, wow, this is a really unique area of the law. It kind of blended my legal background with my interest in politics. And I think because I came from that kind of campaign strategy side first, I really understood what the client was trying to do and get to. And I think that was one thing that separated me in this field than a lot of people that just come in as attorneys, because I've been on that other side of it. And so that's kind of how it really started. And I recognized, wow, I can kind of be in politics. I can pay my bills, not live election cycle to election cycle, and live out of volunteers' basements, which was a big upgrade from my previous campaign days.
Oh, this is just really crazy. I love the analogy you made of that political campaign is like a startup, because that's not what I'm sure 99% of people think of when they think of a political campaign, but there is really so much involved. And speaking of startups, another group of clients that you have are startups, which is, kind of the hot word right now. Everybody wants to have a startup. So what is it like to work with and to get a startup as a client?
Yeah, so I think kind of like becoming a political law attorney and kind of working our way into, I think, startup entrepreneurial world, working with investors and others. It's kind of by accident, because I think that, what we built originally was a firm that was built more around this political law practice. But as time went by and we worked with more and more clients that became more diverse over time, there was definitely this recognition that a lot of the services that we provide to political clients were a lot of the same services and the type of care that startups and investors and other people, they needed as well. I mean, I think that the common thread between our clients, I used the word change makers earlier. A lot of people say, okay, that's kind of an overdone buzzword. But in reality, I mean, I truly think these are change makers. These are people that are under a microscope or going to be under a microscope. And sometimes they don't even realize it. I think I have a quote on our website from Pericles that says, just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics doesn't take an interest in you. And the irony for a lot of people that want to create disruptive startups and go out and move fast and break things is, they don't want to deal with attorneys, but we're exactly the type of people they need on their roster.
Yeah, because they're taking risks and maybe sometimes cutting corners or getting large amounts of money in and hiring left and right. And, I typically work out of a co-working space, and those aren't the kinds of, probably not the scale of startups that you work with. But I hear their conversations about how they're like, oh, we need to hire 3 more people right now because we just got a round of funding and have to make sure that we're using all this money. Spending money like that you can end up making a lot of mistakes and have a lot of risk there.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about something like an autonomous car company. And, this is, all the rage is going to be huge technology advancements in this area. Just think about it when we have autonomous cars and, the first 1, 2, or 3 people die in a car crash from an autonomous car. We see a world in which hundreds and thousands of people, I don't know the numbers of people that die in car crashes on our roads every day, but 1, 2, or 3 people die in a car crash in an autonomous car, then it's not going to take long for the congressional hearings to start. And, the reality is, a lot of these things may represent great improvements in our society and advancements, but, because they are disruptive by their very nature and what they're doing, they are going to be subject to that scrutiny that, frankly, others aren't subjected to.
Sure. One of the things I kind of wanted to dive deeper into, because we hear this, most lawyers know, and young lawyers and experienced lawyers know that, the cornerstone of any strong, healthy practice is reputation and relationships, right? So do great work, get the word out. One of the challenges to that, though, is especially if you're just getting started, how do you get that first client, or how do you get the first couple of clients that you can actually establish a reputation and start to build relationships? And for you, I think it would be interesting to kind of hear those early days, and maybe it was helpful to be at the DOJ, but how did you get that flywheel moving in terms of starting to develop a reputation for the work that you do?
Well, I think, for me, and this would be my advice to anybody out there, I mean, whether you're an attorney or anything else, is, realize that people are always watching and you don't know when you're going to get your big break. But a lot of times people that you come across in your past maybe going to present an opportunity. And if you've impressed them previously, you've done good work, you're an authentic person where you've developed, I think, a real relationship with people, I think it lends itself to that type of reputation building and, the ability to get those referrals later on. It's interesting, and kind of thinking back to my younger years in Washington, D.C., and, D.C. is definitely a, networking heavy place. But, I often say that, every city has its own currency, and there's kind of like proximity to power. And you see a lot of people coming into D.C. and they're just avid networks, and they just network, and they build a network that I would say is, a mile wide, but an inch deep. And the advice I give to a lot of young people out there is really focus more on not the kind of the breadth of your networking, but building deeper networks. You want, it may not only be an inch wide, but if it's a mile deep, you want real, genuine relationships. People can spot out a disingenuous networker anytime. And I think the key to long-term success and building relationships is to be authentic and frankly, just someone that you want to be somebody that people like to be around and somebody likes. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what business you're in, if you're a lawyer or a barista, at the end of the day, that's the key to human interactions and connections.
Yeah. A few months ago, I read Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. I have to say, I'm sure not everyone got this out of it, and it might have just been me, but I stopped reading it 2/3 of the way through because I felt like he was pushing for a very transactional system of networking. And I just feel like, as you kind of mentioned, it's disingenuous, and it shouldn't be this like, oh, I give them this and so I get this. It's more cultivating an actual relationship with people without thinking what you're going to get out of it right in that moment or even at all.
Yeah, I think that if you're looking at conducting your networking in a transactional way, I don't think that's going to get you far. I mean, one thing that, Keith does say, and I don't know if he says it in the book, but I heard a podcast of mine, but he recommended, he talked about vulnerability and the difference when you go introduce yourself and you start rattling off, oh, I've done this, this, and this, and, the typical introduction that, others may get for you, but, it immediately turns people off. But if you can, show some vulnerability and show kind of some of your own weaknesses, people gravitate towards that. They trust you. They see the authenticity of it. And, I think you're dead on as long as, it's about being real. And you don't even want to do that in a way that comes across as inauthentic. But it's just, again, it just seems to be kind of go back to like basic EQ. But frankly, a lot of people don't have it.
Yep. No one likes to try hard. One of the things I wanted to bring it back to, you talked earlier about how most of your clients are referrals and they're not likely to go online and look for something like campaign attorney or political attorney, but they probably are likely to look you up online to get a sense of, your expertise and your knowledge in this area. And so one of the things that you've really done a nice job of is when someone searches for you online, I encourage listeners to search on Chris's name just to see what comes up. You will see a lot of your media appearances come up for searches on your name. So kind of talk to us about the role that those media appearances play. And one aspect is that, most lawyers, even regardless of practice area, would love to get the kind of PR and press that you've been able to achieve. And so I think listeners would be interested to hear how you started down that path, and then as well as how you're using those media appearances on various platforms like Facebook and YouTube and that kind of thing.
So my goal with a lot of the interviews and TV appearances that we do is to establish credibility and really for the authority marketing aspect of this stuff. I doubt that very many of my clients are watching a Fox News interview live. They're not watching it, picking up the phone and then calling saying, hey, I want to hire this guy. But ultimately that gives us the opportunity, maybe to post it on our website or YouTube page, or, it's just out there living on Google. That way, when we do have a potential client that's referred to us and they say, okay, who's this Chris Gober guy? Type them in Google and see what comes up. They will see maybe a Fox News interview or, a blog post or something like that. The idea is to help seal the deal on that authority marketing. I have, there's a guy, his name is Rusty Shelton in my entrepreneurs organization. And he's written a couple of books. One is Mastering the New Media Landscape, and another is Authority Marketing. And, he's kind of helped really push me kind of in this area to kind of go out and, it's about building your brand, but he's really huge on authority marketing. People used to write, a blog. And as you guys, it's podcasting and the authority that gives you, in attorney marketing. And it's like writing a book, doing media appearances. It's all of these things that really people on the outside world looking in, that at least gives you the appearance of authority, and it goes a long way. I have been surprised about how many people have come up and said, oh, we saw you on Fox News, and things must be going really great. And it almost kind of like there was this big shift in my life that all of a sudden there was some success there because I showed up on TV. And it's just kind of always, I have always kind of have this internal chuckle of like, okay, I'm not really doing anything different. Nothing's necessarily, massive shift in earth is what's going on in the law firm. But you start doing media interviews and all of a sudden, the stock that other people put in that is just, it's amazing.
You're famous.
Only to like my mom and maybe her Facebook friends.
Well, I don't know. I've heard, I've heard through the grapevine that the president watches Fox News. So you might be seeing you on there.
Yeah. Well, I said that, a lot of people don't watch this live, except for the president. When I am we're getting up at 3:30 in the morning to watch, get on Fox and Friends first, I at least know the president's watching.
That's right. It's a very targeted strategy.
Yes.
So speaking of the appearances and the president, no, I'm just kidding. Do you work with a PR person or a PR firm to get those appearances, or was it just sort of happenstance?
Yeah, so I have effectively, I guess, what's an agency. Name is guestbooker.com, and they're the ones that they've worked at a lot of the news stations. They've been former producers, and kind of their role is, a lot of these stations reach out to them, say, hey, we want to talk about this topic, and we need an expert. And they have kind of a number of clients that, they know when, say, something comes up on, a particular issue in the legal or political world. Hey, I'm the person to talk to. I'm the expert in this matter. And so they'll kind of serve as, the link. And, I'll be honest, I mean, there's a lot of opportunities out there. I probably turn down 90% plus, of the opportunities out there. Just trying to manage, I also have the day job, and I have to make sure that my clients are well served and we're turning everything around. But at the same time too, there's a lot of these topics and things that I want to get that, I'm balancing kind of the need for the news, and they want some sensationalism there, but I'm also trying to balance that with my own credibility. And so I want to be very careful about, I'm not doing the news just to see my face on camera. It's not doing it for, those kind of purposes. So I want to make sure that when I do it, it's reinforcing my brand and not taking away from that.
Another thing that I'm personally curious about is how you got involved with EO. That's actually on our radar. Everybody keeps telling us, oh, you got to join EO. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the value that EO specifically, or just networking organizations generally, have had and the role that they've played in terms of your practice and professional development.
Yeah, so EO, so Entrepreneurs Organization, it's one of these entrepreneurial groups. There's YPO, there's this. I think there's a couple of different iterations and different types. And, EO is for people that own or founded a business. So you're kind of within this group, and there's revenue requirements. So you get in with a group of people. It's a global organization. We have about 160 members in Austin. And, you're surrounded by fellow business owners, entrepreneurs. They're going through a lot of the same trials and tribulations that you are. There's the experience sharing is amazing. We actually meet with what we call our forum. There's 9 of us that meet, same 9 people. We meet every month, and you talk about, okay, the top 5% and bottom 5% of your business family life. And it gives you kind of the sounding board to talk through with people with different challenge you have. And, overall, it's just been this opportunity for just massive growth, for me, both personally and in the business world. I tell people that when I look back at my career and I think about maybe the 3 most important decisions I made as a business owner, I actually think that joining EO will be one of them, because it's been just kind of life-changing in my outlook in business. And I think kind of my thirst for learning, because one thing is whatever business you're in, but attorneys, and you get so wrapped up in the day-to-day and what you're doing in the grind, at some point, you almost stop thinking about the big picture or learning something new. You're just trying to survive. And at least for me, I know that there's going to be this period, at least once a month But usually there's even more learning experiences than this that I will go in, and it's this time to, you sit there and reflect, you look at the big picture, and you just aren't getting kind of lost in all of the details. And it's just a great way to kind of refocus and kind of get your mind right on what kind of your purpose and your goal and your mission is. And, if you need to recalibrate, it's a good kick in the butt.
Yeah, no, I think that's really valuable. I think it's also interesting, as in my journey and talking to a lot of lawyers, you're not the first lawyer to say, to exploring networking and professional organizations outside of legal, right? So it's not limited to just lawyers. And I think it's an interesting statement about, certain historical institutions for lawyers, that a lot of lawyers are now seeking this kind of community and this kind of professional development outside of the legal space. I don't really know where I'm going with that, but I just think it's kind of an interesting observation and trend that I've seen with other lawyers as well. And it sounds like that you're echoing that sentiment. You're not very active in like traditional, or maybe I shouldn't be presumptuous. Are you active in traditional lawyer community groups?
Not as much with the bar association and things like that, and I differentiate what I would say are more networking organizations and opportunities, and what I would say describe as more development. And, Entrepreneurs Organization for me is not about the networking and trying to generate business. We actually have solicitation requirements. I mean, somebody could come ask me for services, but I can't ask for them. But I tell people, you don't join EO in order to build a network for your potential business. You join EO so you can become a better business owner, a better spouse, a better person, and all that has to offer. I think that with a focus on that and improving in those areas of your life, I think, frankly, the business and the additional clients probably take care of themselves. But, I think that to me is where I spend more of my time, is trying to be a part of organizations where I'm around people that humble me through their own success and what they're able to do. And I love being around people that are just kicking butt in whatever aspect it is of their life, because that inspires me to do more.
Very well said. Yeah, I know my husband is actually an EO as well, and he really finds value in, of course, the connection and the community with the entrepreneurs. But really, organizations like that do also truly help you grow your business and can give you ideas, and you can see what other people are doing and remind you that you're not just a lawyer in day-to-day, you're also a business owner. And I know that is one big struggle, is that when you're working on cases day in and day out, you can forget and push to the side the marketing efforts, the employee happiness, client development, all of that stuff can get kind of sidelined. And it's really cool to have things like that remind you just to be in the business.
Absolutely. Always, good is the enemy of great. And, I'm looking for every opportunity for somebody to kind of show me what I'm doing wrong or not doing well enough to, figure out how to take it to the next level. And EO's great for that.
So to totally shift directions here, one thing I am curious about is you have a very active and are fairly outspoken on Twitter. And so as for your practice area, kind of sometimes needing to mind your P's and Q's about things, how do you balance that with having a public persona where you are sharing your opinions on things?
Yeah, it's definitely a balance. And, the irony is, I have some people that say that, I'm frankly not vocal enough. And, kind of in this world of, this authority marketing and building your brand and this presence and, where newsjacking, taking items and then talking about it is a great way to get more and more exposure. It's tough because walking that line, I think, between being relevant and frankly balancing that with a traditional lawyer and law firm, where, as you said, you have to mind your P's and Q's and there's traditional standards. I think that's a tight line to walk, and, something that probably, I continue and struggle with every day on kind of where that is, because, I would have some people in my firm that would probably be more conventional and say, okay, we kind of need to pull back here. Remember, we're a law firm. And, and then I have others that say, okay, well, you're an authority on this. You need to kind of be out there. And I wouldn't say that I have perfected it by any means. And, we'll see how over time, that develops. The one thing that I am able to kind of get away with a little bit more maybe than the traditional lawyer out there is at least by being virtue of a political law attorney. Unfortunately, you kind of at the dinner table, you don't talk politics or religion, with the family and friends. That's always kind of not possible for me because, it's like politics is life. And so it just kind of enters a little bit more probably in Twitter and other things with me, just because, that's what I get up and I do every day. And, frankly, I can't be authentic if that's not a part of kind of who I am and my voice.
Yeah, that's fair. I honestly didn't really think of it like that because I was thinking, okay, yes, you do a lot of political work with your firm and that's most of what you do. And so like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be saying, certain things or necessarily giving an opinion. But now I'm realizing one of the conversations we had at LabCon where we met was that you were saying, oh, that firm is more of a Democratic political firm. This one's a little bit more Republican. And so I guess there are those alignments and it's okay to kind of toe that line and talk about your...
Yeah. Let's just put it out there. Bernie Sanders is not hiring me regardless of what I say on Twitter.
Yeah, no, but I think it goes back to your point of the authenticity. Like you've got to be who you are and you've got to, stand up for the things that you believe in. Otherwise, you lack the authenticity. So it's, politics or other areas of life, you got to be you. And so I think that's an important thing. One of the things that we see with lawyers all the time is like, we talk about this a lot, but I think it's relevant here as well. If you try to be everything to everybody, you're nothing to nobody, right? So if you water down who you are or go vanilla, you're not going to stand out from the crowd. And, of course, if you're a corporate lawyer or something like that, maybe you play it a little bit close to your vest, especially if you're going to represent people running for campaigns. I imagine that you'd have to at least speak to some of those issues.
Well, the irony here is I worry less about what, say, people on the other side of the aisle think about my posts and more about people on my side of the aisle or my clients, because, the hard thing with what I do, there's not a person out there, I don't care who you are, that I agree with 100% of the time. And so I have clients that, we'll definitely disagree on a number of things. And that's where I have more concern about being out there on anything, is because I may have a client where we disagree in the margins on certain things. And so that concerns me way more than turning off a client that is not my target audience anyways.
Too true.
Right.
Man.
Well, I have two questions, and the second one will be more or less relevant depending on the answer to the first. So question number one, this is really important stuff here, so strap in. Are you a college football fan? Okay, so that's all you need to say. Number two, how are the Aggies going to finish this year? Take your time.
Long, dramatic pause.
We have video, and so podcast listeners, you're not going to be able to appreciate this, but out of all the things we've talked about today, Chris is struggling the most with this question right now, and I don't even know if we're going to be able to really hold his feet to the fire here.
Yeah, there's, you want to talk about things near and dear to my heart, and, that's obviously, that's Aggie football, and it comes with a lot of pain as well. There's moments of joy and then a lot of pain. So, I'd have to say, I would be happy with an 8-4 finish given the talent and that we got on the field in the transition. But, we'll see.
It's a tough schedule.
Well, look at this. We get our SEC East, opponent that we get, switched out every year. We just happen to have Kentucky in the year that Kentucky actually puts together a football team. That just always happens to us. Like, it's like, oh, we'll get Vanderbilt. Oh, well, this happens to be the year that Vanderbilt, is ranked 15th.
Right.
And, just always happens.
For anyone who is not a football fan out there, I just had to look up what the Aggies were. So if you're doing the same thing, it's Texas A&M University.
Yes.
Kelly, I considered us friends before, but
Well, I have the burden of being a Michigan fan, so and I always bring it up, especially when I had a hunch, that you might be interested in that. But Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I think that it is extremely valuable for lawyers of all different types. I think we covered a lot of good stuff, and really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with us today.
All right. Thanks for having me. Great talking to you all.
And listeners, as always, should you have any questions or feedback about the show or are willing to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. And as always, please don't hesitate to check us out on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you subscribe to podcasts, and subscribe, leave reviews, and connect with us in all of the various social media platforms at your disposal. Thanks again. Until next time, we're out of here.